After my dad died, my mom threw out all of his belongings to make room for her partner, and forced me out, saying she didn't want filth from the past. My father died 3 weeks ago, following a protracted illness. He had been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis a few years back. He fought valiantly, but he soon became unable to continue, and we lost him. It was a great emotional blow for me because I was much closer to my father than to my 18 meters had no idea how to feel, and I was just starting to deal with my sadness when my mother decided to toss me out of the house so she could move in with her boyfriend. Within 1 week, I lost my father and discovered that my mother had been having an affair with a coworker all along. I'm not sure if my father knew about it, but it doesn't make a difference. I was outraged when she brought home her boyfriend just 4 days after my father died, and we had a heated argument after he left. She told me that this romance had been going on for a long time, basically since my father was diagnosed. She stated I had no idea how tough it was for her to have a sick partner, and so I had no right to blame her for finding love elsewhere. She also stated that she was aware that she would eventually lose her spouse, therefore she saw nothing wrong with what she was doing. I informed her that what she did was extremely pathetic. She told me I had to leave, so I paid for it. The next day, she didn't want any filth from the past in her home anymore, and she wasn't just talking about me. She and her boyfriend had begun moving a lot of belongings from my father's room in the morning. By the time I awoke, there were crates in the front yard. My mother informed me that I could either take the boxes with me or burn them. Either way, they were all leaving her house. They gave me a few hours to gather my belongings and depart. I opted to spend my time packing my possessions rather than disputing with them. My mother's actions suggested she was too far gone, and I didn't want to sacrifice my dignity by speaking to her. We had pretty well stopped getting along a few months before my father died, because she was constantly fighting with him. I didn't believe it was proper to dispute trivial matters and be so mean to him, especially because we knew he wasn't going to make it. After learning of the affair, I lost all respect for her. Therefore I was relieved to be going. I made a few phone calls, and after a while, my girlfriend said she could speak with her parents and allow me to stay with them for a few weeks until I could get back on my feet and make other plans. I am quite appreciative of that. I've been living with them since my mother booted me out, and they've been quite nice, particularly my girlfriend. We've just been dating for 3 months, and she didn't need to do this, but I'm grateful to her. On the day I left, I grabbed the boxes that my mother had thrown away, which included my father's stuff, as well as my own. I figured I couldn't let them burn since that would mean losing the remainder of what my father left behind. This made my room really cramped due to all of the items, but it was worth it. For the past few days I'd avoided even glancing at those crates, let alone rummaging through them. The reason was simple. It reminded me too much of my father, and I was not prepared to confront it. I knew I'd end up bawling on the floor since I already missed him so much, so I'd been avoiding it like the plague. However, 2 days ago, I made the decision to go through some of the boxes. Regardless of how difficult it was, I was extremely lucky because the first box I chose was full of documents and documentation from my father's room from before he was taken to the hospital in his final weeks of life. He had been working from his room in the house because he was in no fit to go out every day. My father worked as a tax consultant for a large corporation, so there was a lot of paperwork involved. I didn't comprehend much of it, so I put it aside. I got to the bottom of the box and found a blue manila file with my name on it. That was it. What I discovered there is going to finish my mother, and I'm here for it. Going through the contents of that folder, I learned that my father had really left a will, which my mother was presumably unaware of, or perhaps she did and was just not telling the lawyer. Not only did I uncover the will, but also several additional documents, including the house deed. It found out that the house did not belong to both of my parents, but rather to my father. After reading the will, I learned that my father had left the house and all of the money in his account to me. My mother had only received his car, which was still a huge deal because my father drove a lovely automobile and she had taken ownership of their holiday property. I recognized my mother had no right to kick me out of the house because it did not belong to her, now or at any moment. It was originally my father's, and it is now mine. So far, my father's lawyer had informed me that his assets would be frozen until the court determined how they would be distributed. However, as soon as I discovered those documents, I called him and informed him of my findings. I invited him to my girlfriend's house and asked if I may move back into my own house, as my father's will clearly specify that the house belonged to me, not my mother. He affirmed that I was free to do so if I wanted, and that my mother had no authority to kick me out without appropriate notice. That was everything I needed to know. The lawyer would manage the will's execution, but I planned to address the problem with my mother. I called her right away and informed her I'd found my father's will. he had indicated that he would leave me the house and all of the money in his bank account. She remained silent for a few minutes before saying it didn't matter to her. But now that the tables had been turned, I asked her to leave the premises. The house never belonged to her, and she had done nothing to deserve it. She'd been nasty to my father and now she was being horrible to me. I informed her that I wanted her out by the end of the week. That's when she began groveling. To be honest, I anticipated her to argue with me because that is how she has always been, argumentative and unpleasant to everyone around her. Instead, she begged me not to say or do anything because she had convinced her partner to move in by promising to handle everything. Apparently, her coworker was married but had recently filed for divorce, and his ex-wife was demanding a large sum of alimony, which was understandable, given that he cheated. He was concerned about it, and my mother promised him that she would manage everything for him. This meant allowing him to live with her so he didn't have to worry about housing or rent and could concentrate on his divorce. If I approached them and stated that the house did not even belong to her, she would be screwed. So if I talked to her boyfriend, she would not only be homeless, but also alone. I'm not a cruel person. So I told my mother she could keep behaving as if she had the means to help her partner, but I didn't want her to live in my house anymore. I vowed not to say anything about what she had told me, as long as she agreed to leave the house by the end of the week. I didn't care where she went. All I needed was for her to leave so I could return to my home. Then she started telling me it wasn't fair, it was blackmail, and I couldn't do this to her. I reminded her of how cruelly she had treated me just a few days before, so it was absurd that she wanted me to consider her circumstances now. I did not believe I was being unjust. After disagreeing with me for a while, she began crying on the phone, saying she couldn't believe I was treating her like this simply because she wanted to be happy in her life for once. She claimed she didn't want to marry my father, but she was already pregnant with me and her family had pushed her to. She claimed my father had never treated her properly, had always been preoccupied with his work, and had never made enough time for her. She was only trying to have a good life with her partner, and the only reason she kicked me out was because she knew I was like my father. I wouldn't stand in the way of her happiness. She stated that my actions were proving her point. I didn't know what to say at this point, so I told her she had 1 week and hung up. Since then, I've been feeling rather guilty. I'm not sure why, but hearing her cry over the phone made me feel horrible. I'm not sure if this is because I'm doing anything wrong, or if it's simply because I'm a sensitive person who can't bear hearing people cry. I'm bewildered, so I'm here to ask, Ida, why did you tell my mother and her boyfriend they had 1 week to vacate the house? Edit, I don't have any family in this state, so I had to rely on my friends for aid. I've spoken with my grandparents because I'll be attending college in a few months and will need their support to handle expenditures. After describing the issue to them, they severed relations with my mother. She's probably not worse off for it because she never got along with her own parents and only had a cordial relationship with her in-laws. Regarding the will, I'm not sure why my father left the house and all of his money to me, or why he hadn't discussed it with his lawyer. I did ask my father's lawyer about it and he revealed that he had been urging my father to prepare a will since he was diagnosed, but my father kept claiming he would do it later. Now it appears that he left behind a holographic will because there were no witnesses or lawyers involved, which may make it simpler for my mother to fight it. We'll deal with it as it arises. Fortunately, in our state, even such wills are regarded as genuine, and I'm thinking my father was aware of this. As for why he left the most essential stuff to me, I'm guessing it's because he presumably drafted this document while at home, and my mother had been arguing with him over nothing in particular. She was only arguing with him because she could, and he couldn't just leave her no matter how upset he was. I suppose that is why he took this decision, and to be honest, I believe it was a good one to address your questions. I don't know my specific motives, but here is my theory. Update 1. Hello. I am still living with my partner, and after reading the comments, I have decided to rethink my decision. I will continue to insist that my mother leave the house, but I have chosen to modify the terms of my agreement. After I posted the last update, many of you urged that I consider the possibility that my mother will fight the will, which would cause me a lot of grief. I thought about it, and you were correct. I didn't think about it at first, so I called my mother back. I informed her that I was now willing to give her 6 months to locate a place and move out of the house. She looked astonished when I mentioned it because we hadn't spoken since our last conversation. She didn't have an explanation for her change of heart, but I did tell her that since I was giving her 6 months, she needed to swear not to fight my father's will. Hopefully, 6 months would be enough time to verify the legality of the will in court, and then we could begin dividing the assets. I suppose 6 months would allow my mother's boyfriend enough time to finalize his divorce. Personally, I would have liked to generate a lot of hardship for my mother and ask her to leave within a week, making sure she felt as bad as I did. But hey, I need to right now. It's more vital for me not to act rashly, because that will only lead to difficulties for me rather than her. She stated she would think about it before agreeing to anything, so we'll see what she says. Update 2. Hello, 3 days ago I told my mother that if she promised not to fight the will, I would let her stay in the house for another 6 months. I was leaving for college in 3 months anyhow, so I assumed I'd ask my grandparents to send me money so I could buy an apartment. I did not want to burden my fiancé by staying with her for so long, but her parents insisted that I do so. My girlfriend and I have only been together for 3 months, but we genuinely love each other, so she said the same thing. With my living arrangement fixed, I wasn't in a hurry to have my mother leave the house because it didn't make sense. I hoped my mother would agree to my demands so that I could have my father's lawyer sign off on them. If she signed a legal contract, she wouldn't be able to back out. I was expecting to hear from her with good news, but instead she called me today and asked if I expected her to sign any paperwork or contracts for our agreement. I instantly replied yes, since I did not want to mislead her. And to be honest, I did not trust her. This was a given. She paused for a few seconds before telling me that she was not interested in signing a contract. That annoyed me because it implied that if she knew she had to stick to it or face the repercussions, she was hesitant to make any promises. I was upfront with her, telling her that if she wasn't willing to sign a legal agreement, my offer was off the table. I told her I didn't trust her at all, and she shouldn't be shocked considering her recent behavior towards me, which has been nothing short of nasty. I expected her to disagree, but she told me she agreed, though she also didn't trust me, insisting that I was unquestionably my father's kid. I had no idea what that had to do with anything, because neither my father nor I had ever done anything that could be considered untrustworthy. The only thing she had against my father was that she had been forced to marry him because she became pregnant with me, and my grandparents decided it was best to proceed with the marriage. That is not my fault, nor is it my father's fault. If she didn't want to marry him, she should have stood up for her rights. Besides, I am not even sure how true her narrative is. I asked my grandparents about it, and they stated they hadn't really pressured her, but they had only encouraged her not to raise me on her own because she was so young at the time, and my parents appeared to be in love. Both of my grandparents suggested they marry, but there was no pressure on them. The other issue my mother faced with my father was that he worked too much. I don't believe that's a major issue because, of course, he had to work. My mother didn't work for the first few years of their marriage and finally started working about 7 years ago. She obtained the position since one of her friends and her spouse founded the company. Otherwise, she would not have found the position she currently brags about. She claims to be an independent lady, but that is only because my father has always supported her. She had no right to say she didn't trust me because I'm my father's son. I was annoyed, so I told her she could do anything she wanted, but because she refused to sign a contract, I wanted her out of the house. I hung up before she could say anything. She tried phoning me numerous times after that, but I was too annoyed to speak with her. She hasn't called in the last half hour, but I'm confident she will. I will only talk to her after I've calmed down. Update 3. My mother did not call me again following our last talk. As I described in my previous report, I waited for her to call for the next 2 days, but she just did today. I was nervous because I wasn't sure what to anticipate. To be honest, on the one hand, I genuinely wanted her to agree to the deal I proposed, in which I let her reside in the house for 6 months until she could make alternative arrangements in exchange for her not contesting the will. I thought I was being fair, but after our last disagreement, I wasn't sure she would agree. When she called today, I tried to be kind and civil, because this wasn't just about her. I also had something to lose. I was expecting positive news, but as soon as I picked up, she informed me that she had made her decision. She opted not to sign any contracts. Instead, she was determined to fight the will, and she had even consulted with a lawyer about it. I was taken aback because this obviously meant she would no longer be residing in the house, which belonged to me. I told her that if she contests the will, she will no longer be able to live in my house. I hoped that would bring her back to her senses, but she said I had no authority to kick her out because the will had not yet been ratified. She had a point, but she also had no authority to kick me out because we were in a bit of a gray area right now. I told her we probably have until the probate was completed. That concept clearly made her uncomfortable, and after a few seconds, she informed me she'd look for a place to live, but she'd take her time because I had no right to tell her what she should do. I assured her again that she could take as much time as she wanted, but that I would be back by the end of the week. She began ranting, accusing me of being a bother and claiming she had done nothing to deserve the harassment I was subjecting her to. I almost laughed because her claim that I was bothering her was biggest joke of the century. She kept attempting to rant, but I hung up because we had nothing else to talk about. She'd made her decision and I didn't think I could change it anymore. I'm going to do what I believe is right, and she can't stop me. Her partner, who is going through his own divorce, will not be much assistance to her either. I, on the other hand, have my family, girlfriend, and friends on my side. In fact, I believe I will tell her boyfriend the truth about my mother because I have been withholding information for far too long. Since she has made up her mind, I have decided to be an inconvenience, and there is no reason to keep this a secret any longer. I did it. I informed my mother's lover the truth about the situation at the house. I don't think he had any notion until recently, which is strange, considering he lived with my mother. This is a major deal to keep from your boyfriend, especially since she was still in contact with me, and I'm sure he would have asked about it, but I assume she's pretty adept at keeping secrets. After all, she hid her affair for a few years. It was not difficult to reach him. I just searched him up on Facebook and sent him a message containing proof. I also explained why I was telling him the truth now, and not earlier, because I had been negotiating with my mother. But since she had made it apparent that she was not interested, I believed he had a right to know the truth. I sent the message 2 days ago and I finally heard from my mother today. I was expecting an eruption, but I didn't realize it would come so late. Anyway, she tried contacting me this morning, but I blocked her out of frustration. I've also blocked her on social media. When she ran out of other ways to contact me, she set up a fake email account and sent me a message from that address. In the email, she said that I should be pleased now because I had caused so much drama between her and her boyfriend for no reason. She claimed he had decided to leave her and return to his wife to attempt to work things out, blaming her for the entire situation, which, to be honest, he was correct about. I'm not really sure what she's furious about. The message was lengthy, and it contained warnings that she would make sure I paid a high price for this. All I could think was, she can bring it on. Truth be told, she no longer scares me. I've already lost all I could lose, and there's only one direction to go, up. So, I'm looking forward to the court case. Update 5. Hello guys. I haven't kept updated on what's been going on in my life over the last year, and I believe it's time I did. As I previously stated, I was looking forward to the court process, and my mother did end up fighting the will. The case got to court, and my father's attorney and I fought as hard as we could. Long story short, after 8 months, we eventually received a favorable ruling. The will was validated and upheld. This happened 2 months ago, and I'm still really pleased with it. My mother had to give up the house, and we no longer communicate with. I have no idea what she is up to, but I am delighted she received her karma. Even her own parents have stopped communicating with her, so I'm pretty sure she's not living a joyful life right now. My neighbors told me that on the day she moved out, her boyfriend came to help her. So I'm betting they're back together, because no self-respecting lady would return to a man who had cheated on her. I'm very sure his wife rejected him, so he crawled back to my mother to make things right, and she gratefully accepted him. Honestly, I'm pleased they're together. They deserve each other. I'm confident my father is beaming down at me from heaven because of demonstrated resilience, strength, and a willingness to stand up for what is right. I'm in college now, set to begin my 2nd year. My grandparents are currently supporting me financially, and they will continue to do so until I find work, for which I'm glad. I know many of you are intrigued about my relationship. She also attends college, and we meet on weekends. In fact, we're arranging a little break for just the 2 of us this weekend. We are still going strong and are really serious about each other. Life is currently serene, and I am grateful to be at this point. Getting here was the most difficult part. After that, everything else felt easy.